I was actually born in 1976 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Both my parents are college professors were at the University of Puerto Rico. That's where they met. My dad was my mom's English teacher, American Lit teacher. He was 31, she was 19. My dad is originally from California. My mom is originally from Puerto Rico. So I grew up in a sort of academic, intellectual family, speaking both English and Spanish at home. And so in that sense, the bilingual Spanglish thing comes fairly naturally to me. And I grew up in Puerto Rico, did my undergraduate work at the University of Puerto Rico, where I earned a BA in English, following in my dad's footsteps. Then I moved to Stanford, California, where I did my master's in Spanish at Stanford University. But I always had this other, I guess, more pop side that I always wanted to explore. So while I was there, I interned at a Latino community TV station in San Francisco. And I was really just frustrated with academia. I didn't know what my next step was going to be. So I moved to New York in 1999 with no clear plan. I had done stand-up, actually, in stand-up comedy in San Francisco, and I actually hated it. And so I moved to New York, and I got a job at Boricua College, this college in Brooklyn, teaching. And there, one of my colleagues was Nancy Mercado, who was a Nuyorican poet, And at that time, she was the editor of Longshot magazine. And through Nancy, I met a lot of the people in the old beat and Nuyorican scenes. I read at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, and I met people like Pedro Pietri, for example. And when I saw what these poets were doing, people like Pietri, I thought, wow, that's it. So that's the way I can bring together my more, I guess, academic and arcane interest in poetry with a larger, funkier, more irreverent pop voice, which I couldn't do really in the context of comedy or just writing poems at home. So that was really sort of crucial in terms of linking those two modalities of my work and my character. And then slowly I started reading other people that showed me that you could use poetry in these other ways to affect or appeal that other side of me. For example, reading Allen Ginsberg and the Beats, or Pedro Pietri and the Nuyorican. Of course, Neruda. No halfways. Honorable Latin American poet can survive without coming from Neruda at some point. In terms of beauty and form and mystery, I think I owe a lot to Latin American modernistas. Not necessarily the same as the English or European modernism, which is something else. But people like Rubén Darío, Leopoldo Lugones, more recently Herrera Reisig in Uruguay, the early Pales Matos in Puerto Rico. It was, again, very rhymed and very verbally overloaded and exuberant poetry. I think unlike a lot of what I conceive of as performance art, which is very radical formally in its experiments, my sensibility tends more towards pop and rock. So that was another big influence growing up, is before even reading the Beats, I was in touch with the beat sensibility of people like Bob Dylan or Patti Smith as performers. So that immediacy of rock and roll, of the pop language, and that sort of disposableness of it appeals to me, because it can deflate sort of the grand gesture of the poem. The Beats were a big influence, especially Ginsberg. Just I guess the air of the outsider status, the pissed off outsider with a moral voice. I think he's usually seen as a hippie, but I think actually there was a lot of punk in Ginsberg. It was sort of, I'm going to live life on the fringe of experimentation at every level. It can be horribly corny, and I think if you take it too literally politically, you're probably going to be corny in terms of what you write and how you live, but there's an air there, I think, of commitment to poetry at a total level. It's also something that I take both from the Beats and the Nuyorican, but also from Latin American avant-garde poets, which is poetry is total. So even though on the one hand it seems like a paradox, as poetry is very pop and it's an artifact and it's a product, but it has to be able to include everything or engage with everything. There's something that should be out of limits for me with poetry. That's why you have to write poems about, I don't know, hanging out at the 7-Eleven. Well, go for it. It's out there. So definitely in that sense, the Beats and especially Ginsberg were big. And later Pedro Pietri I think Pietri and me filled in the missing link of how do I do stand-up comedy. And of course he was doing basically, I guess, stand-up tragedy on stage. So things, you know, that Pietri would, and he was actually, he took no care to be polished or elegant or sophisticated in his performance. And you could, I guess in that way it was very punk rock. You could think he had no idea what he was doing, and perhaps he didn't. But it was about a larger relationship with the audience. I think Pedro really brought the audience to the forefront. And so he had to make sense of his performance. So he'd show up like, you know, all dressed in black and all sort of deconstructed. And he'd just throw stuff on stage and, you know, get you with a fish hook by the neck, or he'd do parodies of the national anthem, the Puerto Rican national anthem. And the idea was, okay, is this vaudeville? Is this camp? Is this performance art, stand-up comedy? And that, I guess, that hybrid nature, that it can be all of those at the same time, was really powerful to me. And of course, the fact that he was Puerto Rican, you know, didn't hurt. Also, it just showed me, wow, he's doing it. You know, I can do it, even though my experiences aren't his. So it was also, again, an outsider, sort of using all the elements of popular culture. You know, the pop songs, the riffs, you know, the one-liners, and, you know, the sort of the bawdiness and the irreverence of it, and sort of the confrontational, you know, outsider status, and making a sort of big political statement that was very, very unstable. It's never even one place or the other, and I really love that.